Sanjaya Mikey Man is not with us today. Sanjaya got voted off by the people. So instead of him being here, I'm very happy that we've got Dr. William Hardy, who is the Associate Dean of Agriculture at Auburn University, as well as being an economist, as well as being a lawyer. You got more credentials than you got time to work on all that stuff.
Just going to school all my life.
That's what it is.
Right.
Anyway, I've asked Bill, we've worked on cases together, and I asked him would he join us today in this podcast and talk a little bit about the work of an economist, and maybe we can look at the way we work together and how that goes. Which reminds me, I think back to that case that you and I did, the Ford case. We had a case where a young man was mentally ill, and I think he held together pretty well on medications, and he got off and he got paranoid and went to the hospital, and they decided to incarcerate him or put him in the mental hospital and turned him loose in the emergency room, and he had a paranoid attack, jumped out of his car, and a truck ran over him. So that's sort of the basis of the case, as I remember.
Exactly.
And I think my role in that was to talk a little bit about the sort of vocational loss that he would have. He had worked as I think he was an assistant manager at the McDonald's in that town.
I think that's right. Yes.
Yeah. So that's maybe a good starting place, and we just
Okay.
you sort of tell us in that case what it is that you do when you come in as a forensic economist, what your role is. I guess I should maybe even ask you before that, what is a forensic economist?
Okay, I think basically the role of a forensic economist in a case is to look at an individual's economic loss. Primary thing we're looking at is obviously lost earnings. When someone's injured and they either are totally disabled or partially disabled, and their earning capacity has been reduced so that they aren't able to earn as they were earning in the past, or they had the potential to earn in the past. So we look at where those lost earnings are. Another thing that the economist does in a typical case is we look at future medical expenses.
Right.
Again, we need, I can't put together a life care plan or say what kind of medical needs a person's going to have, so we need the medical experts or the rehab experts or whomever can put together the life care plan to say, all right, here are the medical needs, here are the services or the pieces of equipment or whatever an individual is going to need. And then I would go in and put the economics to it. Try to project the future increases in cost for these particular services and pieces of equipment or medications or whatever, and then discount all of that back to get us a present value amount to talk about what it's worth today. Another major thing that we look at in an economic analysis for an injured individual is the value of their lost household services, the non-market services. In many instances, these things tend to be overlooked because we don't think about the value of what each of us as individuals provides to our household each day. Just the normal maintenance around the house, the vehicle maintenance, the painting, washing dishes, mowing the grass, all those things have value. We take them for granted. I tell my wife she takes me for granted all the time on all the things I do around the house. And she says, well, you just think you're worth more than you really are. But I think if she had to replace me, she would find out what my true value is.
You probably figured that out, haven't you?
I have figured it out, but she doesn't believe the value. But at any rate, if somebody is disabled, if they're not able to do the things they used to could do around the house, then in many instances, this has significant value. So that's the kind of economic analysis that I do in a personal injury case.
Let me go back to something you mentioned as you were explaining that. You said bring it back to present value. Explain what that means.
All right. Basically, we're looking at what's called the time value of money. $1 in hand today is worth a lot more than $1 received at some time in the future.
Right.
So, and this becomes particularly important if we're looking at a relatively young individual who is, let's say, a 25-year-old who's permanently and totally disabled. They have a long life ahead of them, or they would have had a long life ahead of them in the workforce. And we're going to project their lost earnings, lost value of household services, the value of the medical care and all those things, say for the next 40, 50 years.
Right.
All right, if we look at, say, we may project that 15 years down the road they would have been making $100,000 a year, or even just $10,000 a year, whatever amount we project that would be in nominal terms. And we're talking about compensating that individual today for that future loss. There are three basic factors that give money time value. One is the uncertainty. Dollar in hand today is certain. We know we have that.
Right.
We don't know for sure about those dollars in the future. A second reason for money having time value is the alternative uses for that money. If I have it in hand today, I can be investing, I can be earning with it, I can be getting a return from it. A third reason is inflation. Inflation is basically the overall increase in the price level. If the price level is going up, then the purchasing power of the dollar is going down.
Okay.
So those dollars that I'm going to receive sometime in the future have a smaller purchasing power than those same dollars would have today. So if I consider those three factors, the uncertainty, the alternative uses, and the time value of money, I would really be, say if I look at that $100,000 15 years down the road, you don't have to compensate me with $100,000 today to make me equally well off. Depending on what the discount rate is, what our rate of return on that investment may be, whether it be 4%, 6%, even 10% if we look at a risky type situation. Then we use a basic mathematical or financial calculation to bring that $100,000 to today's terms. So we may say the compensation of $75,000 today may be the same as compensating me with $100,000 at some time in the future.
Is the idea that you're going to maybe invest that and then spread that money out in terms of receiving it over time?
Exactly. That's what we would hope that an injured party would do. That suppose you are the injured party is permanently and totally disabled, they may get a judgment of $2 million.
Right.
To account for their lost earnings, for their future medicals, for the lost value of household services, and all these other things that they may be compensated for. We would hope that that individual would take that $2 million, invest it wisely, and then live off their earnings from that.
Okay.
Certainly there's nothing in the legal system to require that to happen, but we would hope that would happen.
So they can blow it. I mean,
sure. It could be just like a lottery winnings. You could win that $2 million in the lottery, and it could be going next week.
Right.
So that's exactly what we're looking at. But what we're trying to do in determining that present value is to get a value that can earn at a risk-free rate. In fact, there's some case law that says it needs to be a risk-free rate because the plaintiff should not have to bear the burden of investing in a risky market. If he wants to, that's fine. If he wants to invest in the stock market and possibly lose it all on some bad stocks, or maybe even have an enormous gain on some good stocks, if he has a good investor,
right.
Then certainly that's possible. But some case law basically says that we need to do this present value calculation based on a risk-free type investment. So typically we're looking at the rate of return on government treasury bills where there's little or no risk of default. If you invest in treasury bills, you know you're going to get that basic return for until the maturity of the bill. If there is significant inflation, those bills are readily liquidated in the market, so you continue to turn them over in the market so that you can account for any inflation in the market.
I see.
So those are the risk-free type investments.
Okay. And is that usually when you're doing a life care plan? I'm sorry, life care plan. I'm thinking that because I do. If you're doing your projections for life care plan or vocational, is that what you use? Is think in terms of investing in treasury bills?
That's basically the way that I use for determining my foundation discount rate to bring those future dollars, whether it be lost earnings or life care plan or lost future value of household services or whatever, to bring that to today's dollars.
Okay.
Now there's one rate that some people use, and it's what I've used recently. It's called the runoff rate. I think a lot of actuaries, insurance actuaries use this to combine some information from the present market with information that people who try to predict interest rates for a living do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, basically what they'll do is they'll take the 15-year Treasury rate, a 15-year Treasury bond or a bond that's going to mature 15 years from now. What's the current market saying the yield on that is? So a case that I'm working on now, I pulled that up, and it was about 4.9%.
Okay.
Okay, and then we look at, but this individual that we're looking at is going to live another 40 years, so I've got to do some predicting past that 15 years. So another area of investment is in our Social Security Administration. We hear problems with our Social Security system and all that, and how it's going to go broke. But yet there are people in Social Security whose job is to predict future interest rates.
Okay.
Because as they're looking at the total billions of dollars that are invested in Social Security accounts, they've got to do a pretty good job of predicting what those future interest rates are going to be. And each year they will update that as to what the long-term rates are going to be. So in this case I'm working on now, I looked at the 15-year Treasury, and I believe I said it's about 4.9%. The long-run projection from Social Security Administration for interest rates is about 5.7.
Okay.
So I take a weighted average of those rates
Okay.
to get my discount rate that I'm using.
I see.
Because I've got to discount over the next 40 years.
Right.
And I ended up with a weighted discount rate of about 5.2, 5.3% that I'm using.
I would think that doing that if you were wrong, these people might want to come back and sue you about it under professional error. I don't know if that's right or not.
They might. Thank goodness I've never been sued, and I don't know any economist that's been sued.
Good.
Because most of us realize the uncertainty of predicting what the future interest rates are going to be. And I think we're fairly safe as long as we're using best practice, we're using the best data available, we're using the standard accepted practices and all these the right terminology that we see in the legal setting, and we're trying to make certain that we do the best job we can in estimating what future interest rates may be.
And it sounds like you go very conservative.
Exactly.
Investment suggestions.
Exactly. If I went in and said, "Oh, this guy can go in the stock market," and
yeah.
I have one account that my broker called and trying to get me to invest some more money with him, and I wish I had some to invest, because he said, "Hey, we earned 11% last year."
Wow.
And so if I went in, small account, I wish I'd had several million there.
Sure, boy, don't you?
But no way would I use an 11% discount rate for somebody who's injured, because that's, again, back to some case law that says you got to look at a risk-free rate.
Right.
I could have lost 11% on that investment just
as easily.
Last year we made 11% because it was a pretty good year in the market.
Very good. Yeah. Let me go back to the Ford case that we had started talking about at the very beginning, about the young man that got run over and injured, and I guess they ended up suing him on medical malpractice for at the emergency room for turning him loose. But actually, that's not our concern with that part of the case. We don't do liability, so neither one of us are too concerned about it, other than just wondering if they could make it stick, which they couldn't in the long run. But anyway, in that case, my job, as I saw it, was to do a pretty straight vocational evaluation, determine if he could work in the future, and if so, what kind of, not earnings he could make over his lifetime, but what kind of immediate earnings he could make, and say where he might go. So I think that's sort of what I did, and then where did you come in and take it at that point?
Okay, again, a basic thing that I know you and I are both very concerned with when we do this litigation work is that we don't reach past what our capabilities are.
Right.
As I've mentioned earlier, I'm not going to go in and do a medical evaluation. Most of the time I ask for any medical reports. I ask for the reports that you have provided as far as rehab potential, what kind of work the individual might do. Because with your expertise, you're able to evaluate the medicals and say, these are the kinds of jobs this individual might be able to hold.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that I would attempt to do that, because a good cross-examination would expose my vulnerability there and expose that I don't have any training in that area. So,
right. And likewise, I do not project out people's losses over time because that's not what I'm trained to do.
Exactly. So we have to be careful in any kind of litigation work to, even though we may have done it many times or worked on so many cases,
Right.
that we might feel comfortable trying to say that, I might feel comfortable saying that I know this guy can't hold a job.
Right.
I refuse to do that because I do not have the training, I do not have the credentials to say that. So I have to depend on the work that you do to provide the input for my economic analysis.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, when you looked at Mr. Ford's injuries and you looked at his natural ability, his educational level, and all the characteristics of, that this plaintiff had, and then came back and said what he could do pre-injury and post-injury.
Right.
And that's basically where I start. And I'll say, all right, this guy was working at McDonald's. I believe he had risen to the level of a shift supervisor. And I believe the conclusion was that was probably about his highest level of capability. So
right.
that's what I looked at when I tried to project what his earnings would be absent the injury. And then I said, all right.
And when you say project, you're looking at lifetime earnings.
I'm looking at lifetime earnings.
Okay.
Exactly right. And then the next thing I had to do was to take your evaluation and say, all right, what are his projected earnings given the injury? And we looked at his mental abilities and all the skills that he had, and I believe you found in your analysis that there weren't many. And that I'm not sure if he was 100% disabled. I believe he was.
I think he was.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly either, but I think we'll go on that assumption.
Yeah, I think the conclusion was that he was 100% disabled, and that really makes my job a little bit easier in that I don't have to estimate a post-injury level of potential earnings. Because if you can't work, you can't work, you can't earn. So I estimate what he would have earned pre-injury.
Okay.
And then that would be his economic loss from lost earnings.
Okay.
And again, look at lost household production.
Right.
Those non-market services, the value of mowing the yard and taking care of the cars and painting the house and minor repair items and these type things. In most instances, I don't believe y'all include that kind of stuff in your report. So I'll go in and basically talk to the individual about it. I have a little questionnaire that I ask him to estimate how much time did you spend in this particular activity prior to injury, how much time do you spend now, how much time did you spend on yard work, how much time do you spend now. It makes it so much easier when they said, oh, I was a master gardener, I did all of these things in the yard prior to the injury, and I can't do any of it now.
Okay.
But obviously that's not the situation that exists in most cases. But in Mr. Ford's case, I believe after talking to him, I found that he wasn't very active around the house prior to his injury, and he said he absolutely did nothing after his injury. So I estimated some level of loss. Again, trying to be very conservative because these are kind of soft numbers. I know in cross-examination the defendant's attorney is going to come on hard and heavy to try to discredit what I do. So I don't want to stretch. I don't want to reach out and try to estimate some economic loss that I really can't stand behind.
I'm that way. I don't like to get out on the limb too far by myself.
That's right.
It'll get cut off while you're out there. Kind of a different area that you haven't mentioned. Sometimes economists talk about hedonistic losses. Do you ever deal with that?
I stay away with that like a plague.
I understand.
There is an area of economics called hedonics, where we're talking about the lost pleasures of life. Obviously, it's there. If you're permanently disabled, if you're injured, you can't work, you can't, your back is injured so badly you can't pick up your grandchild or whatever, then you can't have the fun you used to do. You can't enjoy life the way you used to. And that has value. And there are some economists around the country who are known for being individuals who can value that. I've had a couple of attorneys ask me, why don't you do it? And I tell them those are such fuzzy numbers, they're so hard to stand by to justify that I'm not going to risk my credibility by talking about that.
Right.
Litigation, we've always talked about compensate an individual for pain and suffering. And that's part of hedonics. If you're in constant pain, if you're suffering because of an injury, then certainly it's affecting your pleasure of life. I'm not going to tell you what that pain and suffering is worth. The medical professionals can come in and talk about how this individual seems to be in constant pain. Then let the jury put some value to that.
Yeah.
The only thing I've ever done is I've had a couple of attorneys say, all right, this guy's going to be in pain for the rest of his life. It's got to have value. Give me some values. I said, I will calculate the present value of a value that you tell me that's worth. In one case recently, the guy said, all right, let's value that pain at minimum wage. Do minimum wage with some type of projection of growth for the rest of this individual's life, and say, all right, that's how much the pain and suffering is worth. Then let's value that at $10 an hour and at $50 an hour. And just give me a couple of tables with various values, and then we can give these to the jury, and they can say, all right, yeah, this guy's back's going to be hurting him the rest of his life. He's not going to be able to sleep well. Certainly he's going to lose pleasure. He can't even go fishing anymore. He can't do this, can't do that. That's got to be worth $50 an hour.
Yeah.
And take my table, figure it at $50 an hour, and go with it. But I'm not about to say myself that it's worth $50 an hour.
Well, it's an interesting dichotomy because on the one hand, a jury can come up with some wild guess.
Sure.
And so this does give them something to base it on rather than just pulling a number out of the air.
Exactly. And I don't mind providing that kind of information to a jury. But I am not going to say that this lost pleasure is worth $50 an hour or even $3
because when you
an hour.
do, then you set yourself up as the one to make that determination, and that leaves you open.
I'm not going to do it, but I'll give them a range if the attorney asks me to do it. But I'm not even going to volunteer that kind of thing.
I totally understand it. All right, so we've talked about you would do the economic loss. We've talked about household production loss.
Right.
And you've mentioned a time or two about the different kind of medical losses, particularly in the life care plan. Let me kind of delve into that just a minute. When we do a life care plan, we'll project out medical services. We'll project out durable equipment, drugs, attendant care. So there may be a whole lot of different categories.
Exactly.
Do you project each of those the same way, or are they doing it all differently?
I will take each one of them separately, and it's necessary to do that for a couple of different reasons. First of all, the attendant care. The person may be so severely injured that they're going to have constant care for the rest of their life.
Right.
So here you've got the cost of that nurse or whomever who has to be with that person continuously. So you've got to look at that kind of trend. You may have a wheelchair that's going to be replaced every 5 years. So again, we've got a different flow of cost here where you've got one expense every 5 years. And I'm going to look at, in trying to project the cost of these services, I'll need to look at one set of data to project the changes in those cost of services over the years. When we look at our CPI data, there are the information that shows how the prices of different things change over the past and how we're going to project them for the future. Then they have a section of data that's just called medical services or medically related services.
I didn't know that.
And then there's a second section of cost looking at medical supplies. And that rate of change in medical supplies cost is probably going to be different from the rate of change in medical services.
Would that be if one's inflating faster than the other? The rates are going up quicker each year?
Exactly. The rates of change, the rates of inflation in the two different sets of cost are different. You may have some medical, some things in the life care plan, such as a specially equipped vehicle.
Right.
You know, that's not a car is certainly not a medical supply. So I've got to go to the changes in the price index for vehicles, for automobiles. So I look at that. Certainly that vehicle is going to cost more in the beginning because of its, it may have to have a lift, or the person may be able to drive but has to have hand controls or whatever. So you've got to equip the vehicle with whatever special requirements the injured individual needs. But again, I need to, if I'm going to have to replace that vehicle every 5 years or every 3 years, or whatever the life care plan projects, then I need to look at the rates of change in cost for that particular item. I will typically use the same discount rate for all items.
Okay.
Again, going back to my runoff rate that we
Right.
talked about earlier.
Right.
Because we're trying to estimate what the risk-free return on investments might be in determining the present value of those future costs.
Where do you stop all that? How far out do you go?
Well, I go to lifetime.
Okay.
And how do everything.
How do you determine that?
Okay, again, in determining the person's expected life, first thing I do is I go to the tables that are published by the National Center for Health Statistics. And these individuals show from a given age what's the expected lifetime for that person. So a person who's 40.3 years of age at the time of injury may have an expected lifetime of another 35 years.
Right.
So I will go out to that expected lifetime.
I see.
And that's what the situation would have been had the injury not occurred. Because, again, we're looking at averages. We're looking at the entire population where these numbers come from. We may see that with a particular injury that a person may only have, instead of 35-year expected life, may only have a 5-year expected life.
Okay.
So, again, in estimating what the cost of a life care plan may be, I'm probably going to give two numbers. I'm going to give it with what the medical professionals say this guy's probably going to live because of his injury. And then I will say, all right, suppose the medical professions are wrong, and he is able to live for the expected average lifetime for somebody from that age. So I'll probably give the range on those. Again, a jury question. Let them decide what they think this individual's going to live.
And I keep hearing you say that, and I think that part is a strategy, and a lot of the work that we all do is lay it out and let the jury decide. It becomes their decision, not our decision.
Exactly.
They're the trier of fact in
I
those
think
cases.
the purpose for an expert witness, which we're qualified as because of our skills, our training, and our experience, is to provide information to the jury, to the fact finder, that is not part of common everyday knowledge. We're supposed to assist the jury, to assist the fact finder, maybe the judge. It may be a bench trial where there's no jury and the judge is going to make the decision. But we're supposed to assist them in making their decisions, provide information that is not normally within the decision making of the everyday Joe who's going to sit in the jury.
That's our role.
That is our role.
Yeah. Then do you get into, it may be beyond life care, maybe beyond rehabilitation, do you get in situations where you're valuing people's lives and death, maybe a wrongful death or in some other instance?
Well, I've only had a few cases where I've looked at wrongful death. Again, our law here in Alabama is not like any other state in the union.
Okay.
Here in Alabama, we can't talk about the economic value of a person's life. The only kind of damages that are available to the survivors of someone who was killed are punitive damages. And that's basically sealed in Alabama law. So until our law is changed, it makes it very difficult to do any economic evaluation.
I see.
Now, I have worked on a couple of cases here in Alabama where the case was filed in another state.
Oh, okay.
I had one individual who died of a heart attack, and he was taking some weight loss medication that had ephedra. And there's been evidence to show that ephedra causes increased risk of heart attack. So the plaintiff's attorney here in Alabama was suing the pharmaceutical company for allegedly causing this individual's death through him taking the ephedra. So, but the case was filed in New Jersey.
Wow.
And I think that's the home office for the pharmaceutical company.
Okay.
So it was a New Jersey case that we were working under New Jersey law. And in that case, I could talk about what this guy was earning, what his projected life should have been
Right.
if he hadn't had the heart attack and died, and what his family is losing because he died. So we looked at his lost earnings for the remainder of his life. We looked. One adjustment that you have to normally make in a wrongful death case is to take out the value of the individual's personal consumption. So how much of his earnings did the decedent consume? Because if he was using part of those earnings for his own stuff, then certainly his family couldn't consume those earnings. So we have to make adjustment for the individual. And there's some studies that have shown basically how much an individual consumes out of their own earnings. So there's some kind of standard adjustments.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, and that's it's interesting working on these wrongful death cases. But again, because of our Alabama law and the way we're situated here, unlike any other state in the union, then as I said, all we can talk about here is punitive damages.
One possibility that I'm sure you must get into is when you've got a person who was injured, but there really is not a loss because they weren't earning any money.
Exactly, and a standard case that we might see on that is suppose a stay-at-home mom is injured. All the ladies out there will know that stay-at-home mom is producing a lot of economic value, whether it be taking care of children, taking care of the house, or whatever. But the main thing we got to look at is their lost earning capacity. That lady was staying at home out of her own choice, but she could have been working.
Right.
She could have been earning. The defense is going to say, well, she wasn't working, so we can't talk about lost earnings. You're right, we can't talk about lost earnings, but we can talk about lost earning capacity. Suppose this lady was a stay-at-home mom. She was a homemaker. She was injured in an automobile accident. Now she's permanently and totally disabled. It's perfectly logical, perfectly reasonable to talk about lost earning capacity. What could she have done? Because she could have decided the next day to go to work in a full-time job. So we need to look at what she could have done, what kind of earnings she could have been making had she gone to work. And that's the case law permits that. The concept of lost earning capacity permits that. So we'll always do that. Again, it's very easy then to talk about lost household earning capacity. The value of those non-market services, of taking care of the house, of taking care of the children, of providing counsel to the children, of taking care of the yard. The stay-at-home mom may have been one who stayed outside a good bit. They even mowed the grass and took care of the flowers and all of this. If she's not able to do it, either it's going to go undone, which is a lost value, or they're going to have to hire somebody to do it, which is actual money that's going out, or somebody else in the family may pick up the slack and do those things. In either of those three cases, there's lost value, and there needs to be compensation for that.
For the lost ability to do the work you normally do. But what's interesting to me about the other is that what you're talking about first was that here you've got a person who may not be earning income, but yet you can value a loss of income as if they were because they've lost the opportunity to earn
Exactly.
And I see that also in a different scenario where you've got an injured person who all of a sudden has to have a caretaker. And sometimes the wife or husband will stay home and do the caretaker or quit their job or just...
Exactly right. And the defendant is going to argue, well, the wife is going to stay home and take care of this person at no cost, so we don't need to compensate the injured individual for the cost of the caretaker. But that idea is totally wrong, because this person may have had to give up a job, even if the person didn't have to give up the job. If the caretaker was already a full-time homemaker, then there's still the value of those additional services that are required by the injured person where there needs to be compensation for those. A case that I worked on several years ago brings in the earnings capacity concept pretty strong. It's not a case that a rehab person would work on, but it was a divorce case. And it was a divorce case over in Georgia. And divorce cases in Georgia can go to jury for the jury to decide how much compensation should be.
Okay.
This was an instance where a lady had a master's degree. She was married to an Army physician. So instead of pursuing a career, she'd followed her husband around the world with his Army career. Now he's a full bird colonel, found somebody else that he's interested in. He wants a divorce and didn't want to pay his soon-to-be ex-wife much compensation. Her attorney came and asked me, he said, well, look, this woman has given up a career to support her husband in his career.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that worth something? I said, sure, that's worth something. So we went in and said, all right, suppose she had gone to work straight after her master's degree rather than following her husband around the world with the Army. What could she have been making then? What could her career be now? Prior to putting those numbers together, the husband did not want to talk about a reasonable settlement. After he saw the numbers and saw the fact that these numbers may be presented to a jury, then he got reasonable very quickly.
Yeah, that shocked him into a settlement.
That shocked him into a settlement very quickly. And again, all we were talking about was a woman's earning capacity.
Right.
And she hadn't lost her earning capacity. She had just not exercised it in the past because of her choice. And defense argued, well, husband's giving her a good living. I said, sure. And she needs to continue to have that good living. So that's what we argued. We argued what she could have been making had she developed her career, started 25 years ago, rather than going around the world with her husband.
Oh, and retirement benefits.
Retirement, exactly. Yeah. All of that came into play. So we worked on that. So.
Well, my understanding is you've got a deposition in a little while, and that you've got a current case you're on. I thought maybe you might explain or kind of go over and give us some of the particulars, if you don't mind, just since it's current.
And this is the current case I'm working on. Got a deposition at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Again, it's a personal injury case. Individual was it's an automobile accident. The vocational disability evaluation says that it's very likely that this individual is permanently injured. At the time of the accident, he's 59 years old. So you're probably saying, well, he didn't have much work life left, so how can he have much loss? Basically, when I go in to evaluate the loss for an individual, I look at an approach that's called the LPE approach. L stands for the probability of living. P stands for the probability of him being in the labor force. And E stands for the probability of the individual being employed if he's in the labor force.
Okay.
So basically what I do is I estimate lost earnings, and that's what I've done for this injured individual, for the rest of his projected life. Well, he was 58 when the accident occurred. The standard life tables show that he has projected life up to about the age of 81. So here we've got about 22, 23 years left of expected life.
Right.
And I projected his earnings, given what he was doing. He was working in a candy company down in South Alabama. He was a mechanic, keeping the assembly lines working in this candy company, as the conveyor belts and all the equipment in the candy company that helped the workers to package and ship out the candy. He kept those assembly lines working. So based on that kind of work, I said, all right, suppose he did work there till he died. I used that LPE approach, showing what's his probability of living, his probability of being in the labor force, his probability of being employed if he's in the labor force, estimated the growth in those earnings. The present value of his lost earnings for the rest of his life is $406,631. Again, I used the vocational disability report to show that this gentleman is probably totally disabled because of his injury that he received in the automobile accident. With that, using my LPE values, when it got down to, we say, well, most people are going to retire when they're age 62 or 65 or whatever. Using my national data, I came in and showed that at age 66, the probability of this guy being earning is only about 30.1%. And as he gets older, if we're going down to age 70, it's only about 9.6%. So I'm accounting for the fact that it's not very likely this guy's going to be working as an old codger.
Mm-hmm.
But there is some likelihood there. So I give him that benefit of the doubt. At age 80, there's only a 5.6 probability that he's working. But there is some probability.
Mm-hmm.
And if I adjust his projected earnings to account for that 5.6% probability, today's value of what he would have been earning then is only about $2,300. But there is a value.
For the year?
For that year.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm accounting for those values to get my total of $406,631. So in the vocational disability evaluation, the rehab person who did this evaluation said that there is some possibility this individual could go back to work, not in the type job he was holding prior to his injury, but maybe in a minimum wage type job.
Mm-hmm.
Something very, very sedentary type employment. So I adjusted for that. I said, suppose he does, in the year 2008, go to work at a minimum wage job, and he works at that job for the rest of his life. Present value of those earnings would be $62,471. So again, I could adjust what his projected earnings were absent injury with the earnings if he did go back to work at minimum wage to get a mitigation factor there to say, all right, suppose he does go back to work. And that $406,000 that I said he'd lose without any kind of future employment is adjusted downward by that 60+ thousand down to about $344,000. That shows what his lost earnings would be if he is able to go back to work at minimum wage. We also talked about his ability to do things around the house. We said that he isn't able to do things around the house. The gentleman told me that prior to his injury, he did spend a good bit of time doing basic maintenance, painting, repair work around the house, lots of yard work. Can't do any of that stuff now. We estimated the value of that for the remainder of his life to be about $61,000. He'd also had some past medical expenses. Didn't have a life care plan to work on to talk about future medical expenses, but his past medical expenses total about $95,000. So I documented those in my report. For a total expected loss for this injured gentleman, if he's not able to go back at minimum wage, his total loss is about $562,000. If he is able to get some minimum wage employment sometime in the future, that loss drops down to about $500,000, right at $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
So in my deposition this afternoon, that's what I'm going to testify to. The defendant's going to come back and say, the defendant's attorney, when he's cross-examining me, when he's taking my deposition, is going to say, well, what if he can go back to work at something better than minimum wage? Will that reduce my loss? Sure it will, but I don't know what that employment might be. So I'm saying, here's his loss if he's not able to go back to work. Here's his loss if he's able to go back at something around minimum wage. So ranging from around $500,000 to about $566,000. If he's able to go back to work at some payment level higher than minimum wage, then the level of loss will be minimized. I don't know what it would be.
Yeah, you don't, because of the detailed nature of the work you do and the projections, if you're asked on the stand, well, let's assume this, you really can't do that, can you?
I refuse to do that.
I would think so.
I have to have my computer to do it. I know the pressure of testimony on the witness stand. If you're a little bit nervous, if you're under the pressure of a rigid cross-examination, then it's easy to make mistakes. So I tell the defendant which way the number is going to go. I don't tell him how much it's going to go.
Yeah. I guess the last thing that I think these folks might be interested in would be to know if they're doing a vocational disability evaluation and you're working from what they do, what can they do that helps your work out? What's the sort of things that they should keep in mind?
Okay. The main thing that I look for is what could this injured person do prior to the injury? What can they do after the injury? So the surveys of the job market that y'all do, the portion of the job market, the given a person's capabilities, how many jobs were available to them prior to injury, how many jobs are available to them post-injury. That's always very valuable. Now, I know that you provide maybe a percentage loss. This individual may have an 85% loss of job accessibility. Now, I can use that to a certain extent, but if you just say this individual has an 85% capacity limitation, that's of absolutely no value to me, because I need to look at what kind of job that individual was performing. Individual may be totally physically disabled, but his job was to sit at a desk and think. His thinking capacity may not be diminished at all. Likewise, his earning capacity may not be diminished. Probably is because of some other physical limitations. But saying that an individual has an 85% work capacity loss is not as valuable as telling me what jobs this individual could do prior to injury, what can they do post-injury.
And then I've been told, and if you agree with this, that it's helpful if we express, if we're pricing things, we express what year we're pricing them in so that you know where to start your dollar figuring. Is that?
Amen. If you say this individual was earning $10 an hour when he was injured, and if he went back to work today, he'd be able to earn minimum wage of $5.15 or $6 an hour or whatever, we need to know what date we're working on.
Yeah.
And again, I think if the rehab person tries to project what wages would be in the future, I think you're stepping outside your capabilities.
We very much are. Very much are. Well, Bill, I hear from the music that's coming in that we're running out of time on this particular podcast. I want to thank our guest today, Dr. William Hardy, who's a Associate Dean of the College of Agriculture at Auburn University, as well as a forensic economist in private practice. Bill, it's been excellent. Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed participating, and maybe we'll do it soon. I've enjoyed participating.
It all falls on you. Come test time, it all falls on you. We just toss out a lot of crap to see how well you'll do. Oh, we say all kinds of grand things that don't make them true. Come test time, it all falls on